Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
This week on To the Contrary, first, Americans say half their paychecks are gone before they arrive, and harrowing reports about how East African housekeepers are treated in other countries. Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from different perspectives. Up first, paying the bills. Most working Americans earning less than $75,000 a year spend more than half their paychecks before they arrive. A recent survey shows they pay bills in advance because living costs outpace income. Many Americans juggle overdue bills with funds vanishing quickly on essentials such as food and rent. This leaves little for savings or emergencies, forcing reliance on side hustles, family, or credit. This news hits women and people of color who still struggle for equal pay. Joining me on the panel this week are Democratic strategist Patricia Sosa, Republican strategist Ann Stone, feminist activist Erin Matson, and KJ McKenzie, co-owner of Metro Conservative Media. So my round-robin question starts with you, Ann. Why do so many Americans spend their pay before it arrives?
Well, for budgeting purposes, many of them spend it on the essentials so they can be sure they have a place to live and the lights stay on and all that. And unfortunately, medicine and food are the last to be accounted for, which is what's really hurting families so much. Getting the cost of those two items down especially is going to be important. The good news is some of the costs are starting to come down, but we're only, a little bit into the change in administration. So we'll see how their policies play out in the future.
Does everybody else agree those are the two easiest ways to get costs down?
I would say this is exceedingly complicated. It's structural issues related to housing. I agree with her, to education, to healthcare, and the instability that most of us are feeling, particularly until after Trump took over as president, is not helping. It's creating an enormous amount of stress financially. We feel very strongly about those government people that all of a sudden were let go. We know people argue that government employees are not a high percentage of the labor in the United States, but it's considerable in many states, including West Virginia. And veterans are disproportionately represented among those working in the federal government. So we're going to see people that are visible, important, states like West Virginia feeling it even more, linked not only to the fact that the Trump administration is not taking on reducing the cost of food, reducing the cost of labor, and housing in particular, but really focusing on tariffs and on Ukraine and all these other issues that are not at the heart of what people thought he was going to be doing when he took over as president.
How is the world economy changing as well as the U.S. economy, and what should our politicians do about it?
Well, if I could just jump in there, I really disagree with Patricia on that. In cities like Baltimore, where I live, it's tough to stay afloat because we're buried under taxes, fees, and inflation. President Trump has only been in office for, 30 days? So this is an ongoing issue. It's not just spending habits, it's bad policy within the last 4 to 10 years, I'd say. And inflated utility costs, permit fees, parking fines, and a bloated bureaucracy that mismanages city resources right here in Baltimore, where I am. So instead of creating opportunity and rewarding hard work, these cities punish productivity and drive people into survival mode. And I know this firsthand from being a Baltimore resident, born and raised.
Bonnie, I just made lunch and I had avocado with my lunch. And I'm wondering if I'm going to have an avocado again anytime soon with the way these tariffs are going and prices are going up. The rent has been too damn high for a long time, but now the price of the eggs are too damn high. And what we have is
those are, let's point out, from two completely different
Two completely different things, but they need to be discussed together when we're talking about people who are so squeezed. And Bonnie, you opened up exactly where we should focus: the people who are making or being paid the least, people who are being paid $75,000 and under, disproportionately hurting women, women of color, and people of color. But also, looking across the income spectrum, more than 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, even in higher income brackets. And so you already had the price, like I said, the rent's been too damn high for a long time, and mortgage rates are only going up, which is causing other problems. But now you've got things like inflation, and the cost of eggs is astronomical. And you've got a president and his billionaire enabler, who's actually the richest man in the world, putting in place tariffs that only raise prices and uncertainty. Now the president has indicated he's not ruling out a recession. He's not ruling out pain. These are incredibly rich men who are so disconnected from the struggles that people are facing with their paychecks.
And yet they were elected with the majority of support from American voters. So what do we make of that?
The majority of American voters, what they wanted was for him to address their economic stress, the price of eggs, gas. They wanted a healthier economy because they felt that the economy under Biden wasn't doing for them what they wanted. The challenge here, that is not what Trump is doing in his first 6 months of office. And he's creating more instability. He is making the economy more difficult. And the problem is a lot of this is in the name of tax cuts. And you know who's going to benefit from those tax cuts are not going to be the working people of Baltimore. I don't totally disagree with her that working people in this country, the middle class in this country, are structurally in a disadvantage for many, many reasons, and taxes being one of them. But that's not what they're talking about. That's not what they're debating, and that's not who they're looking to benefit. And that is a gamble, I think, that Trump is taking, because it was so clear. I was just listening to Ezra Klein, talking to David Ross about why the Democrats lost, and it was very simple. They did not focus enough on the economy and making the voters feel confident that if Harris was going to be president, she was going to address their problems. And they felt that Trump did. The problem is Trump is not doing it right now. And the polls are showing they don't feel he's doing it. And we know he's not doing it, and the economy is not doing better.
And what's the best way, Anne, you can go ahead and jump in, but what's the best way to get a message out to the voters about what should be done now to try to help fix this?
But first, I have to address the misinformation both Erin and Patricia put forward. First of all, Erin, you can't afford avocados. Boy, that's a first world problem. Trust me, people making under $75,000, that's not their concern. The price of eggs is coming down. The cost of rent is coming down. The mortgage rates are coming down. The price of eggs actually have dropped dramatically in the past couple of weeks. The price of produce, I just bought cucumbers for 30 cents cheaper than I did a couple of weeks ago. I just bought tomatoes cheaper, lettuce cheaper, all kinds of bananas. I got them for 59 cents. They were 89 cents a pound. Prices are coming down, but it's only been a while. It hasn't been 6 months yet. Things are starting to be affected already, though. Things are moving in the right direction. In terms of taxes, Patricia, please update your information sources. If they don't make the Trump taxes permanent, the lower income echelons are going to be hurt more than the upper echelon.
Let me jump back to you, KJ. What's the most pressing economic issue that could get women of color, religious women out and voting and participating politically?
Mm-hmm. It's like what Ann said. Taxes, fees, economic issues are what matter most to not just women of color, but everyone across the board. And a lot of people from the left and in different parties always try to push everything on the boogeyman Trump, and now it's Elon Musk, who God help him, he is helping. He's not even really getting paid. He doesn't have to do this, and he's trying to balance out our government the best way he can. But I want to take it back to the local area right here in Baltimore. Our mayor is currently proposing lawmakers add a 2% sales tax on top of the state's 6% sales tax. Baltimore residents already face 15 different taxes, and they pay twice as much in property taxes as neighboring jurisdictions. So, folks, and Baltimore is predominantly black. It's a predominantly black city. It's run by black Democrats for decades, and we are suffering. We are suffering. This is what the Democrat Party has done over and over again, and it needs to stop. It's hurting us, and our cities are shrinking because of it.
Erin, your thoughts?
Well, I think, Bonnie, we need to focus on the basics here. Bringing inflation down is critical. It is actually one of the primary reasons why Biden lost the election. And that is not what Trump is focusing on. Instead, he is focusing on amassing executive power. And I'll say it, being a lapdog to Vladimir Putin. He doesn't care about the price of eggs. He doesn't care about what it's costing people to get groceries. When was the last time this man was in a grocery store, much less the person who's slashing government? And that's a whole other layer. I mean, that's when, and Patricia had acknowledged this as well, but the fact that so many people are losing their jobs now, hiring appears to be in a pullback. I've seen other headlines recently. You know, people used to, when they were switching jobs, they used to go up higher rates in pay than they are now. So all of these factors are coming at once at the same time that our president is callously suggesting that a recession is on the table and that we need some short-term or pain in order for him to, you know, prove a point to Mexico, and even Canada are one of our longest allies. It makes no sense, Bonnie.
Can I make some sense of it, Bonnie?
Very quickly, please, because we're almost out of time.
We're transitioning from a government that funded the stock market and funded industry to one that's going to be privately funded. That's why you're going to have some pain. He was juicing the economy with government spending. That is not sustainable for the long term. We're moving to where it's going to be private industry. He's bringing manufacturing back. You know, in Virginia, they're crying out for people. We've got over 250,000 jobs open in Virginia alone. Come to Virginia, get employed. And there's going to be all kinds of new higher level, high paying, high tech jobs, AI jobs, all that are being developed now. But tons of manufacturing jobs are coming back already to this country. There's over $5 trillion in new investment that Trump has brought that's going to build manufacturing back in America. That is great for the future. That's substantial GDP growth that will actually increase the tax revenue basis, and we're all going to be able to get more tax cuts in the future as a result of it.
Well, that'll be interesting to watch. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Bay. From finances to domestic workers, East African women seeking work as domestic helpers in Saudi Arabia face severe abuse, including physical violence, sexual assault, even death. Promised decent wages by recruiters and supported by their governments, they migrate with hope, but often return broken or not at all. Hundreds have died in recent years, with suspicious deaths frequently labeled as, quote, natural, despite evidence of trauma. Politicians and influential figures in both East Africa and Saudi Arabia profit from a booming labor trade, running agencies that exploit workers while ignoring widespread mistreatment. Okay, so Patricia Sosa, with immigration and unfortunately, in a lot of situations, white populations or lighter skinned populations mistreating darker skinned populations has made money for a lot of small groups around the world. But tell me about what's going on in Saudi Arabia. Why is it so bad?
It's a terrible situation as described by the New York Times investigatory piece, which kudos to the journalist. It was powerful. 274 women, mostly from Uganda and Kenya, that went to work in Saudi Arabia under a service contract that agencies have, and the government is actually engaged of both countries, have died. In the last year, 55 of those women have died. It's not clear how, because it's hidden what happened to these women. And the government, not only of Saudi Arabia, but the governments of Uganda and Kenya are not doing anything to protect their workers. Different, for example, from the Philippines, that they negotiate with the countries when they send their workers with employment protection, rights, and they actually provide protection for those that end up in abusive situation, which is not uncommon when these workers go from their country to another country, particularly in that part of the world.
And
So
I'd like to bring in everybody, because what do you deal with a situation as the one you have in Ethiopia, where the problems are very internal? They're going on inside of people's closed, guarded houses. And it's not as if there's something that, the people around the world want from the government. They want facts that nobody knows what is going on. It's being hidden, and the government is allowing it to be hidden. So what is the appropriate way to deal with it? Starting with you, Anne.
Well, I have to say thank you for bringing this to light, because I think that is one of the first steps. You have to spotlight.
And we should say it's not new. It's not new. This has
Right.
been in the public light for decades.
But you're bringing it more to light. It's the first time we talked about it on this program, as far as I know. And I think it's important. I think women can be a good voice in this as well. So spotlighting is the first thing. Getting information to Secretary Rubio that he certainly can make part of his outreach when he deals with these different countries. We can put pressure through our State Department for them to look into this and perhaps provide greater safety. But it is one of the reasons everybody wants to come to work here, because domestic servants here are more protected, obviously, than they are in other parts of the world. But I think you're doing a good first step by spotlighting it with this discussion.
Well, and how do we know? I mean, again, this is not new. There have been, royalty from around the world, from smaller countries with very tightly closed governments and very wealthy people running them who can get away with just about anything. So what is the next step? Ms. McKenzie, what do you think should be the next step in terms of trying to bring more of this out in the open and getting the perpetrators prosecuted?
This is a tough situation because a lot of this is cultural. So it would require them to confront deep-rooted issues, including corruption, powerful business interests, and cultural attitudes that undervalue foreign workers. As Anne mentioned, thank God we live in a Christian-centered country like the one we're in, where we value human life. It's often easier politically and economically for officials to look the other way in these types of areas rather than enforce accountability.
But how do they get away with it? And anybody, please jump in here. Erin, your thoughts. How do they get away with saying, finding a woman who had obviously been, I believe, her brain was badly damaged. It looked like exposure to electricity of some sort had taken place. How do they get away with calling that a natural death and getting away with it?
Yeah, no, and thank you, Bonnie, for casting your spotlight on this and putting it on the show. I think one of the key things to look at here is the profit motive. And the fact of the matter, there's people in both the Saudi government as well as in the Kenyan government and the Ugandan government that are very tied in with the profit that comes from this industry being very loosely regulated. Seems like a horrifically mismatched term to discuss what's happening here, but that there's not oversight happening. This is compounded by the fact that it is notoriously, as you pointed out earlier, this is taking place inside private homes outside of the public eye. I mean, even here in the United States, it's notoriously difficult within the labor and the organizing space in terms of organizing people who work privately in the home, because again, these are people who are often isolated, very much subject to the whims of a specific employer. And so I think you need to look at, the profit motive. And in terms of how do we get out of this, clearly pressure is needed. And specifically targeting Saudi Arabia, I would think first and foremost, because that's where these crimes are occurring. I have not as much hopefulness as Anne does that this is something that might come out of our government, both because the State Department is currently being gutted and also because this is the same administration that after Jamal Khashoggi was killed with Saudi Arabia government collusion, that the president then was meeting and praising MBS. And so I don't know that that's the avenue, but in terms of consumers, perhaps there's an angle there where consumers, there's a lot of oil that flows through Saudi Arabia, and so there's different things that people may need to look at doing on an individual level as well.
Patricia, what would you like to see done?
Well, this is why you need the human rights groups and the human rights multilateral institutions to exist for this extreme kind of case, because unless the world put pressure in a country like Saudi Arabia and also in Uganda and Kenya. I mean, they're all in collusion in the specific case that we're discussing today, although there are other countries that are also involved in sending their workers to Saudi Arabia, to the Emirates. So we know this is happening, but I think the world has to come down on this. And I do think not only the government of the United States, I'm agree with Erin, I'm not hopeful that this administration will take it on, but definitely the human rights institutions that exist under the UN system.
I have a couple of interesting ideas, Bonnie.
Go ahead, Anne, go.
One is to reach out to Elise Stefanik to see if there's anything she'd do through the UN. Don't know, maybe. I know her. I could certainly ask. But the other thing is, you'd mentioned Kenya. What about having Obama reach out? He's beloved.
You think he's going to reach out on behalf of a Republican administration?
On behalf of the women in Kenya and in the Middle East. It shouldn't be looked through a partisan lens. This is an issue that should be nonpartisan.
But it still is partisan in the sense that he'd be reaching out to help women who are being abused because of what's going on in, that country's government is allowing to go on.
Right. And he has some influence with the Kenya government. Like I said, he's beloved in that country. So he might be an interesting person to reach out on his own. This is not through official channels through Trump. I'm saying he could be perhaps a change maker in that country. Just an idea.
Yes. So what I'd like to say, I was going to respond to what the ladies were saying about how Trump, would not intercede. And we know he has interceded in human rights violations such as this. Look what's going on in South Africa. He has interceded there with the horrible abuses to the Afrikaners there and helping them resettle. He's opened up resettlement to the United States to them. So I don't rule that out. But it's definitely a market and economic issue that's going on here. Investors in Saudi Arabia help sustain this exploitive labor market because their economic influence combines with cultural norms. I said that before, I'm going to say that again, that often undervalue foreign labor. So the answer is better transparency, consistent enforcement of existing labor laws, and holding both investors and governments accountable to standards that value human dignity above profit.
Okay, but explain to me how, even if you have a small but powerful group of revolutionaries ready to do whatever it takes to blow open the horrible things that this small coterie of very wealthy investors and people who control the country have, how do they do it?
It's very difficult, again, because there's a cultural perception that migrant workers are expendable in these areas, which makes...
Is it just migrant workers? Is it migrant workers or poor people generally?
I think it's both. And women. Women are often undervalued in these areas as well. And it's cultural, it's religious, it's a number of things. So it's very difficult to penetrate that in this type of area. It's complex, as Patricia mentioned about something else earlier.
And your thoughts, Anne, before we run out of time?
Well, again, my Obama suggestion, but exactly what KJ is talking about. It is a slow process. I mean, look at how long it took apartheid to be defeated in South Africa to begin with. And now, unfortunately, we're suffering some of the repercussions with it. Pendulum swung too far. But I think spotlighting it, then getting perhaps some government resources behind it, and again, finding creative ways to sort of inflict pain along with the message. Going after their oil is probably not doable because they control too much of the market and could screw us by manipulating the prices. But there are other ways to do it culturally.
And your last thoughts, Erin. It is very much an oil-related issue. Do you see other ways around the chokehold that the wealthy people in that country seem to have on the government?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm an activist at my core. And so I want to believe that activists, people, have people in the United States who are the people watching this show. We have tremendous consumer power and we buy a lot of gas for things. And so I do want consumers to think about it. But I also, in closing, also want to tie this that The systematic abuse of women is an issue the world over. And I think part of the reason why this doesn't get attention, and it has been going on for so long, is it goes on at all strata in society, and it's disgusting.
You know, the whole thing about the valuing of women, it goes back to the teaching of women's history and having these cultures understand the real value of women overall in society. I'll tell you, when I travel to the State Department and have taught in some of these countries women's history, the shock the men have to find out stuff they didn't know women had done. And it does have a transformative effect on men, even though this is Women's History Month.
Right. Oh, yeah, it is Women's History Month.
I mean,
Glad you didn't let it go by without us doing something about it. And actually, we ran an interview we did years ago with Eleanor Holmes Norton about not this topic, but a related women's history topic and Black American women. All right. Thank you all for a wonderful program with a ton of information. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Keep the conversation going on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok. Reach out to us at To the Contrary and visit our website, the address on the screen. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
You're watching PBS.